Roland, I want to speak a little bit about religion and art, and especially in this case, the experience of hope. There's so many ways that one can approach religion and art. It's a most difficult kind of topic. One idea is that they exist as two different realms, two different regions of life. There's like religion, that's when you go to church on Sunday or say your prayers privately, and then there's another world of art that might happen when you go to the movies or if you watch a particularly fine television program or visit your museum or go to a concert. It seems like those things are often thought of as being separated out. And maybe a healthier way to think about this is to unite it all in the human being. We are human beings, and we have a sort of an aesthetic dimension to us. We have a desire for beauty. We have a desire for the world of art. And we also have this religious dimension, which I think eventually encompasses the other dimension. I don't know if I'm saying that clearly, but to me the largest category is always the religious category, because that's what relates us to the Almighty. We're related to the Holy One through this deep longing of the human heart. And within that largest framework that we are self-transcendent creatures, positively oriented to the gracious mystery, there is something we can talk about that is the aesthetic experience, the encounter with the concert, with the work of art in one way or another. Now, what I want to get at in all of that is what many people say about modern art, or contemporary plays, or movies that are considered to be more artsy or avant-garde, is they're depressing.
Yes.
Very often it's depressing. I mean, why do I want to go to this Bergman film and be, just shattered with this whole experience? I'll walk out feeling lousy. Give me a good comedy here. I don't want to watch this heavy television program. Give me some light fare, because it builds up my spirit. So let's just talk about that side of it a little bit, about that comment that many people make.
Well, if they want to stick with Bergman and have comedy, there is I can't think of the name of the film now. Smiles of a Summer Night is a comedy, one of the funniest films I've ever seen, and I think most people.
So Ingmar Bergman can be comedic.
Every so often he lets his hair down, But I know your point. This man is not light most of the time, and I guess I have a lot of sympathy with that. I mean, you have to judge your own mood. If you are already a little depressed, then I don't think you ought to go see a heavy film. Maybe you should pick something lighter. But it does seem to me, though, that if somebody is never willing to wrestle with any heavier questions, then you have to ask about things like denial, whether what Socrates say about the unexamined life not being worth living. At some point, the person has to ask, am I just shallow? And maybe I should occasionally go to a movie, or at least think about something that's deeper. And if we don't, we're always on the surface, it seems to me.
Well, one of the problems, I think, is superficiality, as you suggest. Maybe there's another problem that along this line, and that is repression. I used another word, denial. I mean, maybe it's simply a matter that I won't face up to the dark side of life. I want everything to be roses, and I have sort of a naively optimistic view of life, and don't bother me with the harsh reality. So I think there's a couple of different motives, and of course I think that the positive motive that you put in is wonderful. I mean, sometimes we shouldn't be watching a heavy television program. It's better to watch something light and frothy. I mean, sometimes it isn't good to be reading an existential novel when one is struggling with horrible problems. So I think we have to grant that. And someone just says, well, I don't want to go see that movie. I read the review, and I know it's going to depress me. So it seems to me that'd be a very good reason not to go. But on the other hand, your point is well taken. If you always said that and never would risk that kind of encounter, then maybe something is wrong, and one has to ask serious questions about oneself.
I think you should. I remember last year reading a book by Paul Monette called Borrowed Time, and it's about the death of a man from AIDS. It's really a memoir, and it's based on reality. It is incredibly well written, and I know there were times in reading that I cried. I remember more than once, and I really found myself being so affected by it. I said, I have to put this aside, and if I have the time to really get into, eventually I did finish it. Found it very tough, But I am glad, that I went through the thing. But you have to judge. Sometimes you're not capable of handling all that stuff, and you have other things you have to do, and you've got limited energy. In the Enneagram system, which I've been reading a lot about, and which I am so impressed by, the personality type number 7 is motivated by the energy always to be happy. And they will go to any lengths in the compulsive form of that to deny pain and to deny darkness. And, of course, what you wind up with is a really distorted human being, because we have to face both light and darkness in life. And I guess in Christian terms, the Paschal mystery of both Good Friday and Easter Sunday. And if you go by Good Friday and you just want Easter Sunday, then you have, I used the word sunny there, which was Freudian, I think.
Yes,
It'd be sunny all the time.
Yeah, right.
Then you've got a Pollyannish religion, which is useless. On the other hand, if you get mired in Good Friday and you have only pain and suffering, then you've got masochism. And Christianity really tries to integrate both the suffering and pain and death, and also resurrection, and
which is the source of hope for us, of course.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, as you were talking, I was thinking that there's a certain thematic material that some people might not be able to deal with. I know that happens with me with the Holocaust and the terrible degradation of human beings. I mean, sometimes I will literally turn off the radio if there's a report on it, or purposely not watch the television scenes. If scenes of the Holocaust come up, I generally will turn them off or turn away, or I wouldn't go see a movie like Sophie's Choice, as I recall. Didn't that deal with that subject matter?
Did, yeah.
And so on? And maybe it would have been good if I would have gone. However, in real life, I did, as a tourist, go to Dachau, I remember, and sort of force myself to deal with that horrible reality. But, I mean, some people might find it's thematic material, like that they can't deal with, like the death of a father or something. They don't want to go see movies that deal with that. But anyway, the point that we're getting at here has to do with the artistic experience and trying to bring out a message of hope. And I think it's true to say that much of the serious art of the 20th century does have a negative tinge to it. I mean, I could think of a lot of the plays that were popular, the plays of Samuel Beckett, for example, or of the writings of Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, the whole existentialist literature. That would be an example of sort of depressing material that really would almost play up the idea that life is absurd. I mean, that seemed to be one of their tenets, as a matter of fact. Life has no meaning. It's absurd. So we have to grant that. And how about expressionist art in the 20th century? We have a lot of that seems to be heavily negative. Picasso's Guernica as an example of that. So, and I think that a lot of what we usually think of as serious movies these days, a lot of those movies do seem to have a dark, depressing side.
Well, one of them that has been in Toledo recently is called Jacob's Ladder. I seem to be in a minority. On the 10 best list, I haven't found one reviewer who would put that there. I have not really encountered even reviews about it or enthusiasm. But Jacob's Ladder, for me, is one of the greatest films that I've ever seen. And it has to do with a Vietnam soldier who is, at the beginning, you see him stabbed. And there's a very quizzical expression on his face, not what you would expect, but like, what's happening, why you? Later you find out it's another American soldier who was stabbed him. But the central part of the film is the stream of consciousness as he lies dying, and he's trying to put together his life, and all these images float by. Demons show up very often because he sees life as dark and as demonic, and he's very near death. The final scene is after he's worked through all of this anguish, he finds himself back in the apartment where he began his married life. He had 3 sons. The youngest son had been killed before he went to Vietnam in an automobile accident. And as he sits there quietly, and remember he's gone through this struggle, I mean, he really has reached a point of calm. And as a matter of fact, one of the final scenes is his therapist, what do you call it? I can't think of the name now, works on your neck and all that, the doctor.
Chiropractor?
A chiropractor.
Yeah.
He goes to the chiropractor, and the man is working on his body, and he says, you need to work on your soul, too. There's something wrong with you. And of all things, he has a long quotation from the Dominican priest, Meister Eckhart. And Eckhart says that when you're dying, hell is what you're holding on to on earth. Let go of that and you'll be liberated, and then you can go home. And right after that, he finds himself in his apartment where he began his married life and where he had the most happiness. And he's just very quiet for a little while, and then hears a noise, and he goes around the door, and there's steps going upstairs, and his little boy, who had died, is sitting there. And he starts crying, to see him again, and goes over, and the boy comforts him, and then takes his father's hand. It's a reversal of the child becoming the parent. It's a very, very moving scene. And he takes his father's hand and said, "Let's go upstairs." And they go upstairs, and then it switches back to Vietnam where it began, and he's dead now. He's lying on the table. And that final scene of going up the stairs, which speaks about going home, really, and it's the image of heaven as the eternal home. For me, that touched such deep, there's such a resonance, that I've seen the film 4 times to give you some idea of how much I loved it. And I think the artists can do that, to take the anguish of another person. Thank God I didn't have to live through all of that, and yet I experienced it in some deep way.
I think as you were talking, I was flashing on the statement of the existentialist philosopher Christian Gabriel Marcel, who says you can't know hope unless you've known despair. That the two things seem to go together. And I think that what happens in a lot of the serious artistic work of the 20th century is that there is sort of a moment of hope. There's a resurrection theme that comes in, or something often at the end of the play, the movie, the book, or even within a painting in some way, this message of hope that comes through. And maybe people need to be more attuned to that. I mean, that tells us something about the ultimate faith of the artist, of course. Do they end up thinking that life is fundamentally absurd? That will come through. Or do they believe that in the midst of the suffering, the difficulties, that there is ultimately some meaning? And that's where I think we're always looking at the end of these things. Is there going to be that ray of hope? And maybe that's what we need to latch onto. And I think sometimes the ray of hope is more powerful based on the degree to which the artist has penetrated the darkness of the human condition. The more they've played that up and helped us to understand the sufferings involved in it, the greater the prospect of the ultimate fulfillment, and the more the hope, I think, is rooted in reality.
Yeah.
So the movie that I didn't happen to see that movie, but even hearing you talk about it, one can get a sense of that.
Yeah. Well, I think of going through a winter, which is my least favorite season, and struggling and driving over ice and all that wonderful stuff. And then when spring comes, the contrast of how wonderful spring is relates to, for me, to how terrible winter was. And the same thing, a dawn that would look so wonderful, in contrast to the darkness of the night. You mentioned Marcel talking about joy, and I can't think of who the spiritual writer is, but I remember a line in one of them where they said, "Joy is sorrow overcome." And it's such economy of language, I liked it a lot. It implies that joy is not some facile and Pollyannish thing, but it is something that we achieve, and it's a deep inner reality through the struggle in life. And until you deal with darkness, the darkness within yourself and in the world, in the Middle East crisis, for example, now, the darkness of a world that still relies on violence and on a war to solve things, and until we begin to deal with that and see how some of that is in me and really grapple with all that, you can't get to any higher degree of spiritual development or the joy that Marcel talked about.
Right, you cannot get there, and on the other hand, you can't. It's hard to live in this world without that ultimate hope.
Yeah.
That God is in charge and that something good can happen. I know that's been part of my response to the whole peacekeeping effort. That even when there's failure, we have to continue to hope that some way the rule of God is being established in our world through our efforts. That none of that is wasted. So that ultimate hope has to be part of all of it. It seems to me.
I think as a Christian that I am not permitted the luxury of cynicism. That part of my understanding of what Christ taught was that very fact of hope and of faith. And you keep going even when there is darkness and even when there is Good Friday. And religion should help you to do that. I mean, all the world religions, it seems to me, are no good unless they help individuals to have that hope and that faith and that endurance.
I go back to the remarks I made at the very beginning about religion establishing the largest worldview. And I mean, it seems to me for a philosophy of life, for a theological outlook, for knowing who we are, where we fit, how we relate to the ultimate reality, that is really the world of religion. That's what puts us there. In other words, I suppose if you and I watch a film, and one of the things the standard we're playing it up against is finally the biblical revelation. In some way, our sense and expectation is a paschal mystery. That is, death leads to resurrection. Suffering endured finally leads to some sort of victory. There is that fundamental notion within Christianity, the cross and going together with the resurrection. Now, I believe that our sensibilities are shaped by that, so that when we encounter the artistic work, we're looking for that. We might see Good Friday and the cross engraved on the whole effort. The question is, do we see the dawning of the new light? Is there any sort of resurrection motif that arises at all? And I think if we don't see that, then maybe the artistic work doesn't work for us, at least as far as it might.
Oh, exactly. Jacob's Ladder, for example, is not a religious film. Religion, I don't believe, is ever explicitly mentioned, except in perhaps that one Meister Eckhart quote. And some of the demonology in it and the reference to hell is almost at times more like a horror film. But finally, after the darkness and so on and the struggle of this man, Tim Robbins plays the main character, and I think it's a wonderful performance. And by the end, when he goes upstairs, when he's reunited with his little boy, and there is some sense of peace, he has won it, and you as the viewer have won it by going through and struggling with that. But I think a lot of people would have trouble with that particular film because it's a little disorienting. And there are times in great plays, movies, films, and so on, you have to struggle.
That's right.
You can't.
But again, it's that hope coming out of the struggle. It seems important. Roland, can we get this expand the experience on all of this to the world of television? And do we find things on television that that we think of as artistic works that inspire hope? That we see an experience of hope in the world that's portrayed there, or in the general way that problems are solved?
Well, I think there are. You'd probably think of comedy, first of all, because laughter in some way is connected with hope and with the ability to go on. I am absolutely delighted by the Murphy Brown program, and I think Candace Bergen is a delightful comedian. The program is well written. And obviously it's put into the context of a group putting on a news program on a TV station that is meant to be funny, and they get situations that exaggerate the reality, but it's good enough writing that I'm not repelled by it. I say, okay, I think that this group of people could actually be at a TV station. And the central character of Murphy Brown is a very strong and a very intelligent and a very, I think, what the feminists would want very much, that she's a wonderful example of somebody who's in charge of her own life, so there's hope in that sense, of the kind of progress you hope to see in society. There's a hope that comes from the laughter. There's hope for me just from the quality of writing, because whenever I come into contact with good writing, I do enough of it myself to know how much struggle there is in that, and it's a triumph when you finally get it done. Well, somebody who can write a good television script or any other kind of writing has my deepest respect, and I think that program is pretty good.
I wonder if the Cosby program can function in this way. I mean, I really don't know the answer to that as I pose it, but whether it can give hope to African Americans in terms of role model, whether it gives hope in terms of dealing with a real-life situation and finding some rational or dialogic way of solving it as opposed to violence. I mean, I wonder if there isn't something hopeful just involved in that. I mean, because so much of what we get, in our whole cowboy tradition and the Western tradition is you solve problems through guns and violence, and that's the ordinary way you do it. Therefore, if a country doesn't do what you want them to do, you go, have to invade them or bomb them. I mean, there's a whole psychology that comes out of those kinds of experiences and those kinds of artistic expressions. And I'm wondering, I don't know the answers, whether something like the Cosby Show represents hope because there's another style, because there's another way of dealing with real issues in life.
Well, I think the answer would certainly be yes, and I'm sure it's not just for black Americans either, because Cosby's appeal seems to be that he says something in that show about family, and I think maybe particularly in a society where the family has really been pretty battered recently. And so that program has always had some of the top ratings, so there must be many white Americans watching it also, and responding to what it says about people who are able to live together, who go through the tensions that you always find in a family, and yet they continue to love one another, and there continues to be hope, and there continues to be laughter. And that's a pretty wonderful message, really.
That brings to my mind Woody Allen movies.
Yeah.
I mean, Woody Allen, has a sort of existentialist side to him. I mean, we're probing the great questions, as he always says. Could get carried away with this. The great questions: can you really believe in God or not? And if God really exists, then I want to deposit in a Swiss bank in order to have my proof of this. But anyway, he's wrestling with suffering, with the inability to achieve intimacy, I think, is part of the theme. And I enjoy him immensely. I enjoyed the New York scene, having lived there for a while, and he's so good at that. And the way he understands religious things some way is the comic side of it again. Yeah. I was going back to what you said before, that there is some sort of connection between hope and laughter. Yeah. And maybe what laughter does is somehow relativize the horrible situation. It puts into larger context the suffering in the human condition. And maybe just by being good comedy, if it is such, that it also brings an experience of hope.
Yeah. Well, I think if you're not able to laugh and go through life, with this terrible grimness, that there's something wrong psychologically and also spiritually. I remember the patron of my religious order, St. Francis de Sales, used to say, it's hard to translate from French, but it's something like a sad saint is a sorry saint. If you think being a saint or being a Christian means going around with this long, terribly depressed face, then you got a wretched view of Christianity, of religion. And it really should help people to laugh and to realize that God must be laughing fairly often at the dumb things we do.
There is, in fact, in the Scriptures, that notion that God laughs, interestingly enough. I think that we're seeing the power of art here, maybe to make a statement. I'm thinking, that it's one thing for a preacher to get up and say, well, we should have hope in the midst of this struggle of life, and that is our task as preachers of the gospel. But there's another slant on it that comes from the artistic world that maybe speaks to people in a different way. Maybe the hope gets embodied in an image, for example. I'm thinking of the movie Babette's Feast, and again, I don't imagine many people saw that movie, so I don't really want to spend a lot of time on it, but it is, you can always tell he's better than I can. And have you seen it more than once?
Oh, yeah.
It's a great Eucharistic statement, and
really
the great banquet that this woman puts together and so on, but I don't know, it wasn't helpful really to bring that up. But the point is, it was a great, hopeful movie, and probably it had a Eucharistic theme to it, and I could get up and preach about the Eucharist as a banquet of hope, and maybe never have anywhere near the impact that would come from seeing Babette's Feast and experiencing that artistic way of seeing the power of the banquet to raise up the human spirit.
Well, at the end of the banquet, one of the men who was there, not even very religious, as a matter of fact, a military man who thinks of himself as very secular, and he's been so moved by the dedication of this woman and getting together the meal that he stands up spontaneously. Everybody else is very religious in the church, and he gives a speech, the essence of which all is grace, that everything in life is a gift, and if you know how to look at it, even the pains, he says, and even the sorrows, and one of the women there he was going to marry at one time, didn't work out, and now they've seen each other after a long time, and the sadness of that separation of what was not He says, forget that. He says, what we have had is a gift. It's a wonderful, moving speech.
All is grace,
All is
which
grace.
comes out of this experience of this meal that they're sharing together, this unbelievably beautiful, good meal by this master chef, if that's the right word, for this woman, and who creates this meal. And out of that Eucharistic experience, he gets exactly the point that we want people to get from coming to Mass, that is, all is grace. That go into the world and find God there. That's why we say, dismiss at the end. The Mass is ended, but go forth now to love and serve the Lord. I mean, the Mass, the liturgy's ended, but now get the point, all is grace. So you're right. I mean, it just makes us a powerful, unbelievably powerful statement about what it's supposed to be about.
Yeah, that is one of my top 10 favorite films I ever saw. It is so beautiful. Another one that many people may have seen recently is Awakenings with Robert De Niro and I'm escaping. It'll come to me in a minute. Robin. Okay, but it's about based on a true story of people who had encephalitis in the 20s and 30s, and part of their brain was affected, and they become almost catatonic. So in the hospital, Dr. Oliver Sacks finds this drug and enables them to come out of their catatonic state for a while. And I don't want to go into the whole film if anybody sees it, but it's a rather sad film by the ending. And yet if you don't walk out of that film really overjoyed by by what you are seeing, by the fact what you have in your own life and that you take for granted, it's really a quite powerful experience.
Well, the person you're thinking of is Robin Williams.
Thank you.
And I have to compress, but we're religion and art, and we're looking at the power of that to build up hope in us. So we have to face the dark side of life, but the artistic world has amazing ability to help us to see through to the other side, to see through a resurrection, a glimmer of hope, the dawning, and that really is part of its great power. It links us in with the gracious God.